Hey everyone! I'm going to be turning this apple mold from Let's Resin into an awesome poison apple. All of the gorgeous glitters in this video are going to be from Larisi, and this one is their holographic red general mix. One thing I love about Let's Resin molds is that they put how many ounces of resin you need per mold, so you don't have to guess anymore how much resin to mix, which cuts down on resin waste. For these particular molds, I need 4.5 ounces for the body of the apple jar, and I need 4.1 ounces for the lid of the apple jar. So I'm going to go ahead and just mix a combined total of 9 ounces. Now that I have fully mixed my resin, I am going to add my glitter. If you haven't checked out my previous tutorial explaining how to prevent glitter from sinking in resin, I highly recommend it. To make a long story very short, I recommend the most glitter that you feel comfortable adding. The more the glitter, the better in my opinion. Now that I have added all the glitter that I want, I'm going to let my resin sit and not touch it for 20 minutes. So while that is resting, I'm going to go ahead and brush on this pigment from Solar Color Dust into the stem. It has been almost 20 minutes and this resin is feeling pretty warm, and what I mean by feeling pretty warm is obviously don't put your fingers inside the resin, but you can feel it on the outside of the cup. You don't want the resin to get too hot in the cup because you run the risk of it completely curing and you have wasted 9 ounces of resin. To prevent bubbles, I like to use 91% isopropyl alcohol, especially with molds that have a lip like this that fit inside of a jar. As your resin gets warmer, it also gets thicker, so I was trying my hardest to not block this hole, and then a giant blob totally went and covered the hole. So I have to put my resin cup down and try to pop the bubble so that that resin can seep down into the stem. If I don't do this, then the air bubble will prevent the resin from getting down in there, and then I will have a stemless apple, and that is not the look that I want to go for. Now that the stem part of the mold is full of resin, I'm going to go ahead and pour more in. To make this lid fit good and snug into the jar portion of the apple, you are going to need to fill this mold up completely. However, I pause here and I kind of swirl the resin around underneath this lip and pinch the bubbles and gently use a toothpick to lift away at the bubbles that are trapped underneath this lid. Again, I'm going to spray my isopropyl alcohol onto the mold and pour the rest of the resin mix into the jar portion of the mold. I unfortunately got a terrible angle here, so I went ahead and skipped this. I unfortunately do notice a few bubbles that did get trapped underneath the lip of the mold, and it created little bubble pits on this outer portion here. It is not too big of a deal, and you can actually go back with UV resin and patch that in later if it bothers you. Now we are going to move on to the green, goopy slime, whatever you want to call it, portion of the poison apple. To prevent the lid from being sealed onto the jar permanently, I am applying this liquid latex around the rim of the lid and the jar. Resin does not stick to latex, and this is so it doesn't seep in between the lid and the jar and essentially glue it permanently closed. I did not show it, but I did let the lid and the jar dry before I put them together. Now it's time for the slime. And to create this, we use this hand-painted epoxy resin by Let's Resin. I am also going to be using this Illuminate green resin dye along with Larissy glitters. At the last minute, I decided to use this glow dust by Solar Color Dust because I thought it would look amazing. If you have never used this hand-painted epoxy resin by Let's Resin, here is a little insight. It is super thick. This is most definitely not a casting resin and is more for applying textured or 3D effects to art projects. When I add this glow dust by Solar Color Dust, I was a little concerned that I would have unmixed chunky pieces of glow dust in my resin mixture, so I add some isopropyl alcohol just to thin it out and make it easier to mix thoroughly in the cup. At this point, I'm pretty happy with how this green is looking, so I wanted to check this glow effect and was pleasantly surprised with how vibrant this glow is. Now I'm going to add the green glitters to my green slime mix. For this resin, I also let it sit for around 20 minutes just to let it thicken up a little bit. Again, I'm going to use this liquid latex to make stencils of the eyes and the nose portion of the poison apple. I did this freehand, and I know that can be intimidating to some people, so you could possibly try using a vinyl stencil, or you can possibly just skip this step altogether. I am just doing this so that I have a guide to follow when I am laying down the green resin onto the apple. Fair warning, if you do use liquid latex, it can be a little bit of a pain in the butt, and that is because the liquid, as liquid does, wants to run down the side of the apple. So to fix this and to speed up the drying process, I did use my heat gun at times just to dry that liquid latex a little faster. Once the latex was dry, it was kind of hard to see exactly where it was, so as a last minute effort, I decided to press on this holographic glitter to just outline where the latex was, and thus creating a pretty awesome stencil in my opinion. When I created this tutorial, I had not done this before, but I am actually pretty satisfied with the outcome. You can totally see where it is the face is supposed to be, and now I know not to put that green resin down there. I believe this was actually a little bit after 20 minutes, and as you can see, this resin is very, very thick, which is exactly what we need, and that is because we need that resin to be able to hold its weight and really keep its shape. With thinner resin, it would more than likely just drip down the side of the apple and fall onto the table, and we would just kind of have green lines instead of those awesome little droplets that I want to achieve. I started from the top of the lid, and I am going to be working my way down. I know it looks like I am moving super fast, but in reality, I was moving super slow, and I was just making my way around the lid, starting from the top, and eventually I create these little drips around the stencils that I just created. Since I do not have the greatest angle, I wanted to show you guys what it looks like so far. When I started laying down this portion of the green slime on the apple, I purposely left a little bit of the red showing on the lid and the jar, and I am using that as a key so that I know how this lid is supposed to fit on the jar later on, which I will show better later on in this video. In my experience with using this 2-to-1 resin, it does take longer to cure than a regular 1-to-1 resin, so this is probably about 6 hours later. And although this is not fully cured, you can leave indentations with your fingernail. Here is the red on the lid and the jar and my key, and I am using this also as a guide to see where the lid and the jar meet up. Now comes the kind of sketchy part, and you are going to use a box knife, or if you feel more comfortable you could use a Dremel. I have not, but if you want to you can. But what you're going to do is separate the lid from the jar by going around and essentially guessing where you think the two meet up. Please be super careful when you do this. You can severely injure yourself. I thought maybe prying it open would help, and it did absolutely nothing. I did go ahead and speed through this process because it took me a very long time to pry this apart, and at this point I actually panicked a little. But have patience and you will see you actually can cut that sucker open eventually. Also, a side note, if you cut off more green than you intend, do not panic because I show you how to fix it, because I too make a mess up. Now I'm gonna say it first, I'm very aware this looks super rough, and that is because I didn't do a very clean job on the cutting. This is also, again, not cured, so it is kind of a little tacky, although my fingers do not stick to it whatsoever. It sticks to itself like crazy. So as you can see, these edges are horrible looking. So what I did is I went around with my box knife and I did cut off all the excess. Do not throw these pieces away because you will use them later on to fix any mistakes you make like this. Now that I no longer need this stencil, I am simply just going to rub it off. Now I'm going to go ahead and fix where I messed up on the lid, and what I do is I take a little scrap of the resin edges that I cut off and I warm them with my fingertips. It doesn't actually stick to my skin, however when you warm it up just a tiny bit, it sticks to itself amazingly. I was completely happy to find this out, and it made my life so much easier. I was concerned that maybe after it cured a little more it would pop off. However, I am happy to report it did not. It actually stayed pretty well. If it concerns you, feel free to spray it with a clear acrylic spray, or you can go ahead and top coat it with more resin. This resin project turned out super awesome, and I really love how shimmery and vibrant these glitters really made this poison apple stand out. I'm also super happy with how the drips held their shape phenomenally while I was using this resin. Now I saved the best effect for last, and that is this glow in the dark that is so amazing, and I am in love with how bright it is. Thank you so much for watching, and if you have any questions, leave them down below. Like and subscribe.